Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today, it is my great pleasure to have Teal Swan here, and we are talking about her book, The Anatomy of Loneliness: How to Find Your Way Back to Connection, which just came out in November. So, welcome, Teal.
It's good to be here.
So, I'm so excited to read your book because I didn't realize, but I think I'm lonely, and it's a weird thing to actually acknowledge that when your life is full of people, friends. But as I read your book, I realized that more and more that what is afflicting me right now, soon to be an empty nester as of August, is a sense of loneliness. And it's a really unusual thing. And it's something that I'm not comfortable with. I'm so thrilled to read your book. It mapped together a bunch of things that I've been feeling internally but couldn't put a voice to. So thank you. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what engaged you in writing this book. And I know that you went on a shamanic journey in Central America. I was wondering, what were the questions that you went in asking yourself?
It was one primary question, and it's what is creating loneliness?
Hmm.
It was all around psychological loneliness, though, the kind that isn't solved by people being in the room with you, the kind that makes you even more lonely when you're in the room with people. I wanted
Hmm.
to know what creates that
Hmm.
and what I can do to end it, basically. So it was those two intentions I went in with, and it was layer after layer after layer that I, let's say, realized.
Yeah. So what would it look like? So you would go into, were you literally in a cave? Were you just, listening to music and put yourself through a shamanic journey?
No.
How did you come up with this wisdom?
I found a local shaman who trained for years and years actually with a female shaman. And so he was like an apprentice. And I told him my intention. I said, this is what I need to figure out. And so it was this incredible relationship between, me and him, not a romantic relationship. It was like purely this exploration around the concept of loneliness and the universe. And
Mm.
so it would be, him and I going through the jungle, um, several instances of taking psychedelic medicines. And each time I came through one of those individual journey work sessions, this integrative process that would take place over the next couple of weeks, where it would be more awareness, sort of click, 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 where the overall awareness that I was getting was now something I could see practically out in the world. For
Mm.
example, I'd have an awareness around what shame actually was, and then I would watch play out in a practical sense with the people that were in the town where I bought my retreat center, actually, in this town called Atenas. So I would be doing these exploratory journeys and then walking out into the world and watching it play out on the world stage. And it was based on seeing that I could kind of connect these two perspective, the very human point of perspective and this higher point of perspective about the nitty gritty aspects of what is actually creating loneliness, basically.
Mm. Okay, so you talk about three pillars of loneliness: separation, shame, and fear. And I thought that you did such a beautiful job of explaining separation and its relationship to ego, and practically speaking, when it happens. Like, how did we even, we're born into this world connected and one with everything. Then I just describe it as I always talk to clients and I said, all of a sudden, like someone cuts umbilical cord,
Yeah.
pours stuff on your eyes, throws you, cleans you, and you're like, ah, like I don't know any baby who doesn't basically scream their head off because all of a sudden you're separated from a place of oneness. So that's kind of the very beginning is almost, and a lot of people talk about birth order or birth separation and going through that sense of, go through the birth canal. You're like, wait, I was like in this beautiful, loving, warm and utero, and then all of a sudden you're like, where the hell am I going? I'm going through a deep tunnel, and then like these people are on the outside and they're cutting stuff away from me. So
Yeah.
I just think that must be, I think that's not helpful. And then it continues. So tell me a little bit about the process of how our ego and our parents and all those things fit together.
Well, a lot of the ways that we step into this position of loneliness is quite benign. Even the learning and the processing of our languages that we use enhances this concept of separation. When a child is born, it's seeing in this very blurry way, almost like a quantum state. And
Mm-hmm.
when we teach a child to look at a color and differentiate that color from all other colors, we teach them to use their brain to separate. When we
Mm.
teach them about themselves, your name is Teal. I am now, just by virtue of being able to communicate with other people, taught into a worldview of myself as separate to everything else in
Mm-hmm.
existence.
Mm-hmm.
This is different for in different cultures, by the way. It's much worse for some cultures and the languages that they use versus other cultures.
Hmm.
For example, some Native American cultures, if you were to like literally translate their words into English, on the end of every word would be an ing.
Hmm.
So I would be tealing, this would be tabling or computering. And so there's already implied this mutable nature to
Mm-hmm.
identity. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is the worldview that we come into, in large part due to our languages, that is causing this perception of separation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that bad parenting does. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
just welcome to the culture you were born into.
Right.
So when we're looking at the step into the space of individuation and into separation, we've got to look at all these different layers. Some of them are like what I just described. Others I would consider much more insidious.
Mm-hmm.
The process of socialization is one of those quite insidious aspects that creates this isolation that all of us feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's that our primary way of establishing social order in our species is punishment reward.
Right.
So what I'm going to do with a small child when they're doing something I disapprove of is I'm going to get mad at them or I'm going to withdraw from them. Either way, it's perceived as a push away. That's the most
Mm-hmm.
important thing to understand. If we
Mm-hmm.
want to understand loneliness, we have to understand the two movements in the universe, away and towards. If I am disapproving of someone, I am pushing them away energetically and they can feel that. And that has massive implication
Mm-hmm.
because as a social species, and we always take this too lightly, as a social species, our survival is completely dependent upon each other. And this is something that is fundamental to our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, more so than even herd species.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a
So,
socialization
I mean,
process that
we wouldn't
starts the whole
walk
thing.
out into a deer. Yeah. And the reason I need people to understand this so deeply is because we're going to fail to understand humanity or even how to come to a better space in humanity if we are fighting our biology. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like what spirituality has done, if you want the honest truth, is to try to force us against our biology for so many years that we're working against the grain and in ways that are super detrimental to us.
Mm-hmm.
None of us would walk up to a deer and tell that deer, you know, it's really dysfunctional. You're dependent on the social groups. So I really think you need to just go out in the field for a little bit and just like, you know, figure it out on your. But this is the message that we keep giving to ourselves and to each
Yeah.
other in the human
Yeah.
race.
Aren't you going to say thank you? You just ate that thing. You didn't even thank me for that. That's so rude and impolite.
Yeah, we have humanity is interesting because we have such a complex social structure.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Mm-hmm.
process of socialization that we go through in which we how we behave or how we're disapproving of our children makes them perceive a push away. It puts them in a position to have to alienate themselves from parts of themselves in order to establish their survival, which
Mm-hmm.
is maintaining closeness with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this which creates an internal fragmentation process whereby we split our own consciousness. And this is the foundation of loneliness, in fact.
Yeah, it's Freud had this I think it was no, Jungian had this idea of parts dialogue so that
Mm-hmm.
we actually have parts that we own and disown. And so if so I'll use my own example. So as a good Asian raised by two Chinese parents from mainland China, I was taught never to have emotions. So that part of me, I almost think of them as like little light switches. So I'm like, okay, turn that off. You can't cry. You can't you can't be sad. You can't ever emote anything. You can't have any facial expressions. Okay, well then what can I do? I can be mad, flip that switch on. I can be smart, so there are all these like little switches that I turned on and off, and parts that I owned,
Yeah.
so, and then parts I disowned. So, and you talk a lot about that language in your book about parts that you own. So, like my emotional, weak, girly part, it was like,
Yeah.
that's got to be in the closet someplace, like under, it's like in a cave with like 10 doors in front of it. There's a guard in front of it. I mean, your analogies are perfectly, I can see them inside myself. So you call them buried, rejected, or unhealthy aversions. That's what we have as our disowned parts. And then
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting is that I didn't think of it, but you have the subconscious and unconscious. Like there's all these things, there's all these like things that are built into our own, let's say, biology or psychology that cause all this stuff to get reinforced. Can you tell me a little bit about? So there's the ego, which is developed from our parents saying, you have to say thank you, or that's not good, or don't show any emotions, or you're not going to be Chinese, and you could be disowned. Like that's literally like this whole equation. So that's the ego relationship, and then there's this conscious and subconscious part that we understand as kids. Can you describe what that is?
I think it would help the people who are listening to understand the ego better.
Okay.
The ego, very simply put, is a self-concept. That's all it is. So I have a concept of self. That's the ego. That means anything that I identify with as me, mine, or I is going to be a part of my ego. Preferences included in this. So let's say that I like horses because I just said I, and then horses is attached to I. Horses are now part of my ego. Now, if somebody attacks horses, I perceive it as a personal injury. So it's almost like you can imagine your self-concept like this magnet, and everything you identify with is something that attaches to that magnet. So a complex ego becomes covered in all of these things that we identify with. Some of those things which benefit us and some of which don't. Now, when we have a self-concept, it is very critical for us because of what I just described. Our survival is about being close to other people. It's very, very important for us to have a self-concept that is good. Goodness and badness is the most important thing for humans. Goodness gets you all the things you want. Badness gets you all the things you don't want, which is what actually creates this primary split between conscious and subconscious. It is that these are the things I'm going to identify with consciously, and this is what I'm going to believe that I am for the sake of my survival. The rest of it I'm going to suppress, deny, and reject and disown.
Okay.
So a person becomes these two major compartments, but within those two compartments, there can be several other compartments. So all of my conscious aspects, let's say that I have a persona that's independent. That can go on the conscious side because it's fine, right?
Okay.
Now let's say that I have a side that's a really good speaker. I'm okay with that. That fits into my self-concept, so I'll put that up there. Now, what's interesting is in the conscious also goes the reflections that you have been given by people, regardless of whether they are accurate or not. If your mother looks at you and says, "You're so self-centered," she does that enough, that actually becomes part of your conscious self-concept. So maybe in the conscious is also going to be, I'm a selfish person, regardless of whether it's accurate or not. Now, anything that we suppress, deny, reject, and disown, which are these opposite polarities, that's what to understand about the being, go into the subconscious. And what's important about the subconscious is the mind essentially forgets about it. It joins the land of which you don't know that you don't know. So let's say that when you're young, you get shamed a lot for your anger. You're like, okay, anger is going to get me in a hell of a lot of trouble. I can't be that. You deny, suppress, reject, and disown your anger. This becomes somebody who later in life, everyone else can see they're angry. But they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have anger. I don't experience those types of emotions. That's suppressed into the subconscious mind. It's what the person doesn't know that they don't know. And so much of that is what's governing our life experience.
I'm laughing because I I was experiencing my own sense of separation because my son, who is in college, and I have another one that's going to leave next year. I was bemoaning the whole thought of Thanksgiving and how it's going to change throughout the years and how we're not going to be all cozy at home. Anyways, and then my reaction to it, because my on button is towards anger. I'm like, I'm fine with feeling anger. I was just I wrote this angry, it was like almost, I was in this writing class, and it's a memoir class. And my memoirs often start off as a diary entry. So I was like, I'm just so pissed off. Like the woman who did my workout class, I was pissed off at her. I didn't like how she looked. I didn't like the music. I then was like pissed off the whole time. And I was like glaring at her. And the people, there are a group of people who read it, and they were like, I find this whole piece alienating. I don't like this. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. They must have disowned their anger part because it was almost like I took them and stabbed them with a knife, by writing this piece. They had this sense of being so hurt. And then I felt in comparison like, wow, I've like just like abused these people by just writing my angry thoughts. But I thought it was so interesting because they're disowned, when they were in the presence of my anger, they were just rejecting it, and they felt alienated from it. They didn't want to they couldn't fit. Some people said I couldn't finish reading it because there was such a long period with being angry. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating.
Mm. You're being friendly. Fascinating is your nice word for it. This is what bothers me immensely about the human race, actually, is our incapacity to tolerate emotional states. Because, you see in a group of people like that, when people have disowned their anger, they've also disowned their boundaries, which is a huge part of our personal truth. Boundaries are about my preferences, my thoughts, my feelings, and what's right for me as an individual. So, I mean, it's literally hand in hand. You have no access to anger. You have no access to your boundaries, and therefore most of your needs you're actually meeting manipulatively. And this big issue in the Western world, especially, it's like you go to these different cultures, and the way that I like to think about emotion is that you're in a huge building, like a skyrise, and every different floor represents a different emotion. And some cultures have certain floors completely off limits, and others completely on limits. So
Right.
it does make it a little bit hard, when somebody comes from a culture where a certain emotional state is fine, but then another is completely not fine.
Right. And I think he's from a Nordic background, and so it was just,
well, there you go.
yeah, it's culturally, it's not acceptable to feel anger. And I thought, and we're in Seattle, which has a lot of that kind of, that's the culture, dominating culture before you arrived here in
Do you
Seattle.
want me to tell you about the Nordic cultures? This will
Yeah.
be interesting
Yeah,
for you.
sure.
I think it'll be
Yes.
interesting for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've been looking into so deeply, based on, this whole, delve into not only loneliness, but what I do for a living in general, which is to break people free of the suffering. And what I'm noticing is that people are coming in basically genetically programmed. And something that we need to accept about genetics is that it goes far beyond just the physical component of genetics. You have come in actually with every genetic memory since the beginning of your ancestors' time. You inherit all of these in your body. And I was talking about this earlier, that the sound of a bloodhound making a noise is something that most whites enjoy, but actually most black people, even if they've never been exposed to that noise before, it sends shivers through their entire body because of genetic memory. Now, something that's interesting about these Norse cultures, which goes even beyond genetic memory, is that we all create adaptations. Every family line, if you trace it, has an adaptation which we could consider a tool for which to deal with their environment and the stressors in their environment. If you look at the Nordic cultures, the ways that they survived through a cold weather climate was by packing into a very small house for a lot of months. And so the way to understand this tool of coping, which you could call stoicism or emotional reservation, like it's not okay to go to these certain emotional states, right, is to imagine taking somebody like from Brazil, like a group of Brazilians, and throw them into a cabin, leave them there for 3 months, and see what happens when you open the door in the spring.
I see. So you're saying, like, in some ways, people adapt to their, I mean, some of it is environmental survival, and that's what they needed to do to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah. Yeah, but the problem that we've got then is that these tools, which worked for us when we were in that type of a scenario, now we have created, a
Mm,
modern world where that's no longer necessary. The tool is outdated, and yet it continues to be propagated from generation to generation to generation to generation.
yeah, fascinating. Yeah, and does that need to be the case? And I'm sure, like, the Asian culture is because there is this kind of a relationship to authority that created this kind of bizarre emotional, kind of like neutered, being neutered, because if you did show emotions, it's like you probably got killed.
Mhm.
So I get it. So I get it. It's a survival thing. And what you're saying is it's baked into our DNA. So here I
Yeah.
am, like myself and all the many Chinese ancestors before, inherent in my DNA is this kind of like, oh, I hear sadness coming, I'm going to, like, run and hide. Like,
Yeah.
anytime I remember when I first started coaching, I'm very empathic, so I could feel someone was about to cry, and inside I just had this nervousness, like, oh no, they're about to cry, and then I want to, like, throw up and do, like, a little dance or something just to stop them from crying. And I had to change that because I wasn't a very good coach because of that. But I think a lot of those things are, like, programmed as your
Yeah.
automatic response to things, and they're part of your DNA. That's interesting. So, how do we know what our disowned parts are? How do we get in touch with those?
I think the best way to get in touch with these disowned parts is to notice where your aversions are
Hmm.
and to notice in all moments when you've got resistance within you. Resistance is something which people are not particularly sensitive to anymore. We were when we were children, is why we cry our heads off whenever something doesn't go exactly the way we want it to. But we've all felt that feeling where we're about to walk out the door to go somewhere, but we feel this part inside of us that's like, I don't want to go. That's resistance.
Hmm.
So resistance is quite simply put any oppositional force. This could be in the form of a thought, a word, or an action. And we need to become hyper attuned to that feeling of resistance to be aware that there are two polarized aspects within us. That
Hmm.
resistance is an indication that there's an internal tug of war.
Hmm.
This gives
Hmm.
us the opportunity to almost like what you were describing with Jung. You can completely go into one aspect of perspective. It's a really good experience for people to have, because usually when you're sitting in the fence, but in an unconscious way between these two parts, you're getting sort of torn in half, and what you're giving is a contradictory truth.
Hmm.
But what we can do is explore fully the polarity. So I can completely become the part of me that doesn't want to go and just explore what that part would say. And then to the opposite, the part that does want to go and explore what that has to say. And by virtue of doing that and the higher truths arising from both of these parts and what they have to say, you can arrive at what I'm calling the third option, which you have no idea what that's going to be because it's not about compromise. Compromise is I'll take a little pain and you take a little pain. It's actually quite
Hmm.
dysfunctional.
Hmm.
What happens when you fully dive into the truth of any polarized selves, whether it's an internal polarized self or somebody else on the outside that you're polarized with, you can come up with the point where both agree, the point where both meet. So
Hmm.
it's the third option that makes both of them say yes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like, this is actually what we mean by internal peace. Internal
Hmm.
peace, see, I didn't know, by the way, when I ventured into this concept on loneliness, that I would discover the answer to internal peace, but I did. It's like an abstract concept, People say, internal peace, I want internal peace. But if you ask somebody, what the hell does that mean? Nobody can actually answer you because most people see themselves as a singularity. They don't see
Hmm.
themselves as this mosaic of multiple parts, some of which are at war, some of which get along sometimes. So we don't even recognize that war occurring within us when it's actually occurring so as to settle it. So it is the conscious mending of these incongruences between these internal aspects or polarized selves that creates a state of internal peace.
Hmm. It's interesting because I've done a lot of stuff with parts and having dialogue between parts and finding the common goal among parts and, like, shaking hands with the parts so that they can
Good.
find a harmony. a harmonistic place, and it does create a sense of inner peace and a sense of self-awareness, because when I hit an obstacle, I'm like, oh, there's my controlling part.
Yes,
Hello.
yes, exactly.
And you can have a dialogue with those things. Now,
I
how
love
are
that you've done that. I love it because this gives us some real fertile ground for conversation around what's really causing loneliness, which is the gap between these parts.
Yeah, you mean the part, and it's funny because I meet with clients and they're like, I can't decide between a job because part of me says this and part of me,
Yeah.
and then when I ever I hear that, aha, there's two parts,
Yes.
and one is bullying, and what I found is like either one is bullying the other, or one doesn't even know the other one exists because it's just
Yes.
like it's like
Yes.
pounded it into
Yes.
the into the soil that it's like, well, I also have this other, so it's
Yeah.
actually bringing out a dialogue between those parts, and oftentimes some other part comes along. It's like, and then there's my ambitious part, I'm like, oh my goodness, here's another part. And it's so
Yes.
interesting to see the dialogue amongst it, that and how berating they are to each other, like these two parts that can't decide which, this is what I usually, what can't decide which job to take. It's like, you never let me, and then it's like, well, you never. It's like, I'm so sick of you, and they're like an arguing couple.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
so fascinating to see, and that causes internal turmoil,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, internal turmoil and internal loneliness, because what we're watching is absent between these internal aspects is intimacy. I refuse
Mm,
to see into you, feel into you. I refuse to take you as part of myself. And so there is a separating between these two aspects. And
mm,
so a person is lonely to the degree that they've got that internal separation.
mm. All right, so here's my own and best. As I was reading through your book, I'm always trying to like, okay, what's my thing as I'm reading through here. So for mine, it's an accomplishing part, and so you talk about having twins, internal twins.
Mhm.
So what are the internal twins? Tell us a little bit. So I think my accomplishing part's twin is like the slacker part that's sitting on the
Mhm.
couch eating chips and watching
Yeah.
Netflix and binging on it. I think that's the other part. That my accomplishing part is like, no, you better get off that couch
Yeah.
because like it's time to get work done. So how do these internal twins work?
It- It's like what we've been talking about with these parts. The reason that I'm calling them internal twins, Siamese twins, is because they
Yeah.
operate in the same body. So
Mm,
obviously, if one twin is going left and the other one's going right, you can't accomplish that in one physical body, which is why we just end up emotionally destroyed, basically.
I see. Okay, so you call them
So
internal twins because same body.
yeah, yeah,
The person sitting on the couch eating chips and binging is the same
yeah.
person who's out like conquering the world. Okay, got it. And
And
so when these parts,
this is how it applies. I want to understand how we got to understand how it applies to loneliness.
yeah.
So if you were the part that was, if you were a person who was sitting on the couch and you had your reasons, every part has a very important and valid reason for its perspective, as much as we have a hard time accepting that.
Hmm.
So let's say that you've got the lazier twin who's sitting on the couch and has a very good reason for doing that. Maybe is under so much pressure, can't take it anymore, wants to escape from that pressure. If you've got another part or another person in the room with you, if you're that part who's like, you need to get off the chair. You're so lazy all the time. This is ridiculous. You're accomplishing nothing. Look at everyone else. That's a push away, push away, push away, push away. You are now alone in your pain. Nobody sees it. Nobody's listening to it. Nobody's taking that way of being as a part of themselves at all, so as to make any change of that
Mm,
aspect. So
mm,
what really has just honestly floored me is the fact that we are living not only our internal parts like I've just explained, but ourselves within the world. We are living in individual perceptual realities. And this is, if you want to, I mean, most people in my position have like their nemesis, the one thing that they're here on the earth, and it's like their kryptonite. And for me, it's these parallel perceptual realities,
mm,
because I had no idea before I ventured into this process of understanding loneliness how pervasive these are, how
mm,
insidious. Um, so we've got these individual perceptual realities that are not shared between these internal aspects, but this happens in our life in the world all day long. And what really interested me is that, because like when we think about these patterns within humanity, so many of us are like, well, I'm a good person, so that couldn't possibly be something that I, could ever be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
But let's look at the most innocuous experience. Let's look at a mom who has a child and introduces a second child, but was never taught how to do that in a way that made the child believe that this new sibling would add something to their life.
Mm.
So the mom, let's look at her perceptual reality. The mom's perceptual reality is the addition of this new child, in most cases, is a good thing. Now we're introducing this little kid, and now you're going to have a sibling. You're going to be able to have a playmate. You're not going to be as alone. That's mentality, usually.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the child perspective, getting into the psychology of a very small baby, especially with mom is no different emotionally than a primary. So the child experiences towards mom the same that we would experience towards husband or wife. So the best way to get into the perceptual reality of the firstborn child when a second is added to the household in a way that isn't adding to their life is to imagine that your spouse, husband or wife, walks through the door today and says, I've met someone new. And this is really good because they're going to be here for a little while. And I mean, for the rest of your life. I'm sorry, actually. I've fallen in love with them. But this is really good because now there's more love to go around. You have somebody else that you're going to be able to play with. But here's the thing is because they're so new, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time with them in the beginning. Now, if that child, most of us are like, hell no.
Right.
Now, if the child starts throwing a fit, starts acting out, they get shamed for it. So that's like us getting punished, having no choice over this polygamous relationship now that our spouse has walked us into.
Right.
It's a completely different parallel perceptual reality. And so what blew my mind relative to this loneliness thing is that objective reality doesn't even matter when it comes to trying to join two subjective realities together. It doesn't matter what objective reality is to the 3-year-old. Their subjective reality is that they've just lost their spouse. So it's the failure to address each person's subjective reality as valid and to get completely into makes it so that we can't really find a way to break outside of it. And like I got to tell you, it's like, me being super vulnerable right now, it's these parallel perceptual realities that absolutely torment me now because I'm seeing them absolutely everywhere. The killer who believes that he's keeping these women safe by burying them in the ground. And you get into his perceptual reality, he is completely convinced. And so, like, when you look at every mental illness, it's a parallel perceptual reality, an individual reality built for one. Paranoid schizophrenia, perfect example. I am being chased. Now, from the outside, a person in a psychology setting would be like, no, you're not, sweetheart. But when they say, no, you're not, it doesn't help that person at all. It just makes them feel more alone in their own reality. And so we are actually perpetuating the cycle by being unable to permeate these perceptual realities that are keeping us in these bubbles.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking I have a dear friend, and she is a very, very talented psychotherapist, and her clients tell her all the time that she is like their mother, and yet, and she has loads and loads of people around her that want to spend time with her, be with her, and she doesn't want to spend time with them, and she feels constantly lonely, even though there are hundreds of people that love her, that care about her, that want to be with her. And I think it's hard I don't really know how that happens. Is it related to shame? How is this related, this sense? And she was in a family that was she was probably neglected emotionally by everyone. I know her psychology because she's told me about it, and was neglected by most of her dad died when she was a very young child, and so there was this whole sense of abandonment. And her mother was working all the time, so she never saw her mother. So her grandmother was the only one who was there for emotional support and recognition. And she wants a partner because a partner is a way that she can feel witnessed and know that she exists. And so this is kind of, and I just find the whole thing just so curious. And I'm not sure how it is even constructed, this whole sense of someone being so loved, beloved, literally beloved, but yet feeling so lonely. Is it related to shame? How would you see that from your perspective?
Yeah, it can be related to shame, but I mean, it can be as simple as developing a worldview of transactional relationship. I mean, if you're looking at a person who's in a therapist type of a role, it's actually not very much different than somebody who is famous. It's You're surrounded by people who want something out of you, and this is the problem. They project on you an image. If a person is in a psychological setting and they sit down, and this is the way they have relationships with people, is by going into a certain mode.
Right.
But
They're
then
like, you're
that's
like
the
my mother.
expectation.
Like, yeah. Ah, so there's an expectation. Okay.
Yeah, so it's immense amounts of pressure. You can't be a vulnerable aspect of self. You can't be angry. You can't ever be upset with me. And so, it's highly likely that in her scenario by now, she's had many of those experiences where people want to be in a relationship with the character that they have set up for her in their mind.
No, that is it. I said, well, you have tons of people. Why aren't you friends with them? And she's like, I can't be myself with
Yep.
those people. I can't be vulnerable with them because I am the person who is
Yep.
their stronghold. If I become vulnerable, then it kind of blows away my psychotherapeutic relationship with them.
Totally.
And so you're saying, like yourself, you had said that, you're a public figure now. You're this, sensation on YouTube. So people are probably projecting all sorts of things onto you, which then what does that mean because I'm not that kind of famous YouTuber. I'm, me and my person in Seattle, but how does that play out in your own life?
What it means is hell on earth. What it means is it's harder to find a relationship than anyone would possibly imagine. Because it doesn't matter how much I talk about the fact that spiritual teachers are not the way you projected that. People need to believe in this concept of a guru. They have to believe in a female figure that is, X, Y, and Z. It's whatever a person believes. So, there is no room for a personal self. Like, I've had relationships end over and over and over based on the fact that, a guy's like, well, I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't think that you'd be needy. I thought you'd be super, super independent. And I'm like, I told you I'm not independent in a relationship. But it just
Wait.
doesn't matter. They're in a relationship with the character. And this is how anybody
Uh,
who's in a position of fame goes. But in my position, it gets very dangerous. Because let's say someone has a persona or an image in their head about what a spiritual teacher looks like. If you're looking for somebody who's austere and all about simplicity, for example, if I walk on stage wearing a glittery dress because I love glitter, now suddenly I'm the Gucci guru. Now suddenly I only care about money. Now suddenly I'm a person out to dupe America. Now I've got a 6-page article written on the Daily Mail. And now I
right.
have a hate group because of it. So
Wow.
it's quite dangerous, the projections and the sort of
Wow, that's huge.
the
So,
way
like,
that
how can so, like, almost the first way that you portray yourself becomes your persona, and then that becomes like an imprisoning way that you have to be all the time in order for people to understand your brand. Is that it?
no, it's worse than that. It's worse because it's not even how you portrayed yourself to begin with. It's what people expect, separate of how you even portray yourself. I mean, it's unbelievable. If you are a therapist, if I was to tell someone therapist and have them write down words that they associate with therapist, that's their expectation of you. If you fall outside of that category, you're in trouble now. So, it's one of the reasons why we chucked the branding around spiritual teacher, regardless of whether that's what I am or not. We chucked it because people could not get outside the paradigm of what a spiritual teacher should and shouldn't be, regardless of whether I'm teaching people to break that mold or not.
So you can't even be human then.
No.
Okay. That explains why some people, I've actually heard awful things, and I won't say the names of people, but they get on stage and they wear these angelic outfits, like these long flowing white robes, and I'm like, what the hell, man? And so they get up, they're like, I am, and they literally call themselves angels. I'm like, what? And that's another, what, WTF? Like, if you're an angel, then why are you here on Earth? Because seriously, if you're human, that's why you're here on Earth. I'm not sure exactly what this whole angelic, weird, flowy thing is. But I wonder if that's what people expect. It's like that's
Yes,
what we want from you. So go ahead and, be that
yes.
person. Oh, that must be terrible. I'm sorry.
No, it's horrible. It's horrible. If I was to tell you the worst part about my life, that's it.
Wow. Right, because then there's all these like expectations of like you're good. You are like wise all the time. You are, oh, that would be awful. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, I'm glad I'm not famous then. There's no expectations then for me to
No,
be anything.
it's pretty funny. Like there's a moment once you get famous, there's a moment that you have where it's like, oh, this is why everyone's in rehab. Now I get it.
Right, because people don't love, well, so people don't even really understand the real you then. Really, they have this persona of you that they always want you to be,
Yeah,
but no one really truly understands who you are, which would be the most isolating thing.
it is, and this is something that goes beyond famous people, goes beyond spiritual teachers, goes beyond therapists. It goes to all of our lives because what we have to notice, and it's another thing that's perpetuated in this massive loneliness, is that we all fall in love with the character. Most people are living in what I call an overlay, which
Hmm.
is I'm committed to what I want. I've decided that that person fits what I want, almost like casting directors. That's how to see us. In our lives, we are walking around like casting directors.
Mm.
And, and so we might look at a person and be like, just like we look at Leonardo DiCaprio and be like, oh, you'd be fabulous for this new role that I really want, right?
Right.
We're doing that with people in our lives.
Right.
And we're not even really noticing whether they fit the role or not. And it's only so long you can keep up with that crap before you break character. And this is when the conflict starts to happen. We're like, wait, no. The deal was you were this character in my life. And the
Yeah.
person's like, but that's not even who I am. And now we're super angry.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
this is what's happening with parenting in general. I mean, this seems abstract until you realize that it is a rare parent who has a child and goes, wow, I wonder what this is about to become. The attitude is
Yeah.
more like, I have a character in my mind. This kid's going to become that character. Now I'm going to shape and model them, and you fit in with this character. And if you break character, now you're a disgrace to the whole family.
Mm. Yeah. So this whole experience that you're feeling as a actress, let's say we are all actresses or
Yeah.
actors, and we're all experiencing that same, maybe not to the same extent as you are, because you have a public that's following you and like, no, you have to be like all wise and everything and calm and like ding, you have all these different things that you have to be. But then for people who don't have that scenario, we are still actors and actresses. Our parents are playing the casting directors, which
Mm-hmm.
we then inherit and go, oh, you don't have to do that. I know you're retired. I'll be the casting director and
Mm-hmm.
tell myself what I can and cannot
Yes.
be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is how it plays into loneliness, right? If I am a character, or if I'm a person playing a character, I can't be loved if someone's loving the character any more than Leonardo DiCaprio as an actor himself is going to feel loved if someone's in a relationship with Romeo.
Mm,
It's not going to happen. So we
yeah.
feel so lonely and miserably isolated based on that. And it's part of the
Yes.
pressure. There is this incredible pressure in inauthenticity. You keep it up. And it inherently you can't act the role without knowing it's not you. So we end up just, it's better to be alone. I'm a
Mm,
person.
mm, yeah. Or what my so this dear friend of mine, I'm one of her, I think her only friends because she, comes to me and she gets sad and mad and, all these different things and despondent and, because she's not my therapist, she's just a dear friend of mine. I end up being, I don't know why, but I think I'm the person who people who have to act come to be real with. Like they come with me and then they're like, oh, here's what I'm like, chain smoking, like it's like I can't, because I can't deal. I just need someone that I can be real with and be understood and love for all of me. Not just like, I'm such a nice, loving mom. I love you. I support you. But like all of me, like the bitchy part, the angry part, like to love all that person. And, Yeah, that's interesting. So I can see how if you have a large part of you that is unloved or can't even be present, you would feel very lonely because you're not even a whole person. Only a part of you is loved, and that happens. What I'm getting now, I read your book, but I'm getting even further is that we do this to ourselves, right? I
Yes.
mean, we're our first. We're ultimately after our parents are gone, we have only ourselves to be accountable to, and we don't. We're not accountable to ourselves, and we don't love those parts of ourselves. Uh, I get it. Yeah. Okay, so what are you doing now? Now that you've
What am
gone
I
to
doing?
the cave, you have learned all these things. How is your life different?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have the closest female friend I've ever had in my life, which is not something I thought would ever be possible, especially with women, because women were the ones I had so much issue with in my life. Um, Not only that, in my childhood, just to be completely candid with you, a lot of my issue was around Mexicans. And it wasn't even something I was educated into. My parents are liberal as hell. What it was is that in my childhood, I was drug around to these different slaughterhouses. And
Mm,
without having any understanding of this, not understanding that slaughterhouses are one of the only people that will willingly employ illegal immigrants,
mm,
all that's
mm.
happening is I'm opening the door, looking at an endless like football field size row of these Hispanic men who are overtly sexual towards me, covered in animal blood. My
Wow.
relationship to the Hispanic race, right? But through the practice of taking other people as part of myself, I have started to make a personal practice of diving into other people's perspective. At which point I opened up entirely to the Hispanic race, and now my closest friend ever is Mexican. So
Oh, I just got chills. Oh, that's neat. Wow.
yeah, I mean, yeah,
Wow.
I
You're
can't.
like
I
becoming
don't
friends
even.
with that part. Oh my God. Wow. Wow, that's cool. That's
I
beautiful.
just. It's like I could be here for 5 years, telling you all the stuff that's changed. It has revolutionized my life to a degree where I don't even know how to. I don't know how I was alive before, to be honest. You know,
Yeah.
just watching my fight with everything in the world, and I don't feel that way. So
Hmm.
now I'm in a space where I can find that internal peace, and that's the best thing. It's not that I'm looking to be away from pain completely. I'm not looking to never have conflict. It's that I no longer have that sense of complete dread that every
Hmm.
conflict I get into internally or externally is going to result in inevitable pain and some zero sum game. That's what I would say. What this process has done for me in my personal life is it has removed me from the zero sum game way of thinking. There is no such thing in my life anymore as I win and you lose. And as a result of completely stepping out of that paradigm, I now have relationships that are completely permanent relationships
Oh.
where it's like I understand this is what makes it safe. What makes a relationship safe is there is a 100% guarantee that there will always be repair. It's not even the pressure to never get in a conflict. Conflicts happen all the time. It's that it's no longer anxious because I know 100% that will be repaired. And it's not just because of my effort, it's because the other person wants it just as badly as I do. So I feel like I'm getting held in life for the first time. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, it's like it's made me more aware of how much I was starving to death before.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And you wrote the book to help other people who are suffering
Yes.
from the same thing. I
Yeah.
love that. And uh, I was asked, what is the name of the book? The Anatomy of Loneliness, How to Find Your Way Back to Connection. And so if people want to find out more about your show, and which I'm sure everyone knows, most people know more about your show than my show. But tell me anyways, how can people actually find more about this material and get to we talked about kind of the structure of everything, but the book also includes a bunch of solutions,
Oh, yeah.
processes, things to try. What's a good place for them to start out?
The best way to do this is to go to www.tealswan, just my name.com, because I've got there you can see all the videos. It's basically like your main hub. There's nothing
Okay.
that's not on that site. And I've tried to make it user friendly because I'm like a technological idiot. So it's pretty easy to navigate, but you can find like all the videos that I do, all the products that I do. One thing that I would say about this book is that it's my firm understanding that if we recognize that we're lonely, it's not enough to just go in the direction of connection. We have to really understand the anatomy, basically, of what loneliness is in order to understand how we're perpetuating it. It's the awareness around that negative aspect that allows us actually to topple those pillars. If we could consider these three pillars of loneliness like pillars, by understanding them completely and how we feed them to continue their standing, we can topple them over, and then now we can know what to replace it with. So it's a two-part book. The first part is about understanding those pillars, what creates those pillars, and how to topple those pillars. And the second part of the book is what to do instead.
Yep.
And it's
Love it.
a whole different way of approaching relationships. It's like this is the stuff I wish I knew when I was, even 5, but I mean, especially a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like part of our human education, I think. I mean, I can't tell you how often I do the parts dialogue with my clients. I do it with myself. Yeah, in fact, I couldn't get to sleep one night because I was having worry. And I thought, okay, what is happening here? Who's here? Like, what's happening? And just being able to talk to the two different parts was immensely helpful. All right, so tealswan.com. Thank you. And the book is called The Anatomy of Loneliness, How to Find Your Way Back to Connection. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.